Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma and I am an atheist Jew, and I am exploring the Torah, the Jewish Torah, 1 week at a time through the lens of an atheist. So today I'm recording in a somewhat contained space. Just happens to be because of where I am this week. So you'll have to pardon the lack of a background and the poor lighting. I'll do my best to try to talk about this Parsha from my perspective as an atheist. So Parshat Mishpatim is a really challenging Parsha because it marks a really big shift, a change in how the Torah presents itself. This is the very first Parsha where it's basically just a set of rules. It has a lot of really strange rules, including rules about what to do if an ox gores another ox and how you are supposed to stone it to death. And it also has some really bright and some really beautiful rules as well about how we should treat each other, especially to me. I just want to lift up at the very beginning of this Torah study the commandment in this particular parsha that says something like, "You shall not mistreat a stranger in your land, for you were once strangers in the land of Israel." So I think that's a really good one. I can definitely take that as an atheist and give it a lot of meaning in our current moments. So anyway, so that's a good one. But we'll be getting into a lot of these. There's about 100. I'm not sure exactly how many there are, but this is Mishpatim. It's like this is the book of laws. So there's basically a bunch of laws in here. Now, just to give you a sense of where we were in the story, just a few days ago, we were just escaping in the story. We're just escaping slavery and going through the ocean and on the other side of it. And then Moses has this long chat with his father-in-law. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the desert, the story here is that suddenly, like, there's all these rules about what you're supposed to do with your ox and what you're supposed to do with your domesticated animals, and it's a bunch of very strange rules to be, it's like if there was a god, you'd wonder like what kind of a god this is, like why is this god all of a sudden so interested in like telling you about what to do about if your ox gores another animal and you have to stone it to death. Like why would there be a god that's so concerned about that? So, and I'm very curious about that myself. I mean, I don't have a lot of really good theories as an atheist about this part of the Torah. I don't totally understand the motivations of the writers at this point in the story. I know that the Torah as a whole moves through a whole series of narrative arcs, and language later in the Torah begins to look more like this language. This is the first time that we encounter it, and so it seems very foreign. But by the time you get to the end of the book of Torah, you've had a lot of this, and so you're kind of more accustomed to it. I think that, so, as I've been doing this Atheist Torah study, I've been getting more and more into, different things that kind of interest me and sort of excite me about studying this text. And one of the things that I've really been getting into lately is the idea that this text was written in either the 3rd century or the 2nd century BCE, and it was written specifically as a document to sort of capture a religious nationalism. It was an attempt by the authors to sort of reject Hellenism and to reject the influences of Hellenism and to create its own unique sort of Judaism. And that this was basically an attempt by a kingdom that had sort of regained a certain amount of freedom and had gained control of its own autonomy as a kingdom to create a religious nationalism based on the text. And so I think that I'm really a very firm adherent to the idea that the text that we see here in the Torah is text that was written around the 3rd or 2nd century BC. And even though it is based on, there are parts of the story, parts of the text that refer to times much further back in human history, that the vast majority of what this text concerns itself with are things that are happening right around the people at the time that the text is being constructed. So I don't know that the authors of the Torah intended for the Torah to actually, outlive the purposes of the time in which it was written. But it could be that they did intend that, because it certainly did. And the people who began to observe the laws of the Torah were very passionate about it. So there's something about religious nationalism that works really well. It's not, as an atheist, obviously, there's nothing about religious nationalism that works very well for me as an atheist. But, for the vast majority of people, there's something about religious nationalism that seems to function well for them. And throughout much of human history, I think religious nationalism, beginning here and in other experiments around the world, has been one way of kind of doing a government and doing a society. So, obviously I don't support religious nationalism. I'm an atheist, so I can't support religious nationalism, but I am trying to understand it. I really am trying to understand it. And, the truth is I really do respect this document. The Torah, I think, is very interesting. Even if it's simply a work of religious nationalism, and even if it wasn't anything more than that, it became something more than that by the adoption of it as an artifact of identity for a group of people. And so over time, regardless of whether the Torah was written at a specific period in time. And, I feel like this week I've kind of been, I feel like it's kind of like when you learn the truth about, like say that, you were adopted, and you find out that, your parents were some sort of unsavory characters, and, you're kind of looking at the truth of your family heritage, or imagine that somebody's been telling you something for years, like you're going to get some really great thing as soon as you get to this point in your life, or when you get to this place, kind of like people who maybe emigrated to from one place to another, and they're carrying around this idea in their head about the thing that they're going to get when they get there. And then when they get there, the place that they're going to is like really ugly, and it doesn't really match their imagination, and it's got all these problems, but that's where they are, that's where they went. And I kind of feel like that right now with the Torah. I already went through that with the Bible, with the Christian Bible, when I read the book called Caesar's Messiah, which kind of put me on the path of really trying to deconstruct that story and that history. And that was good for me because it did a bunch of things. First, it helped me to understand how Christianity is really fundamentally a pagan religion. I mean, because it insists that God is a man, and then somebody killed the God, and then the God arose again. And that's like so pagan. And, when I was a kid, I never really understood that about Christianity. And with Judaism, I mean, I was told as an adult that we had Jewish heritage, and so I decided I was going to go explore that, and I, joined a synagogue, and now I'm really happy being associated with being a Jew. I mean, I really like Jewish people a lot, and I really enjoy Jewish tradition, but and I love studying Torah. I mean, I really do enjoy it a lot, but I mean, I never approached the Torah as some sort of as something that was real. I mean, I always approached it as a document that had I had a lot of questions about it. And now, as I've been doing this Atheist Torah study, I've had a chance to really go deep into investigating the origins of the Torah, some of the different theories about when the Torah was written, how it was written. And, as a result of that, I've really come to see the Torah much more in a much more interesting way, from a more detached perspective. So not just like a perspective as somebody who really enjoys Jewish community, but also as from the lens of somebody who's maybe more neutral about it. And then there's the other part of me, the part of me that's an atheist, and that's the part that I've always really enjoyed about the Torah too, because it gives me a chance. I mean, one of the things I love so much about being an atheist is that in this tradition, I can look at the text and I can sort of argue with it, and I don't have to agree with it, and I can ask questions, and I can find out interesting things. Now, I mean, as an atheist, I could just go full atheist and just completely ignore any religious text and any religious tradition. I mean, because, and that's actually part of what this Atheist Torah study is doing for me as well, is that it's really helping me to think about, what are my atheist traditions? What are my atheist values? I mean, I became an atheist like 35 years ago, but I've never had a chance to really cultivate an atheist culture, an atheist identity, and in the way that religions do. One of the really nice things that religions do is they kind of give you something to do with the cycles of days, and they give the cycles of days meanings, and they give the cycles of your life certain kinds of meanings, and they also give you ways to connect in community with other people who are monotheists mostly, if that's what your cultural tradition is, or polytheist, or pagan, whatever your tradition is. Those give you a way to sort of connect. And as atheists, we don't really have that. It's like we're atheists, and the reason that we're atheists is because we reject religion. We don't believe in God. It's not just don't believe in God. I mean, it's like it goes way deeper than that. It's like we know there isn't a God. I mean, that's the thing that we all hate so much about religion, is just that we know there isn't a God. We're sick and tired of hearing people say there's a God all the time. We think that I don't know. I can't speak for all atheists. I mean, I'm tired of always hearing people say that there's a God, and I wish that I could talk to you about your religion without the God in it. I mean, and find the things in your religion that are really valuable without having to deal with the God. But, I mean, the reason everybody believes in the God is because the God represents these supernatural extensions of their imagination. It represents part of their aspirations for what they want out of the world, and it represents sometimes their forward thinking about what they would like to see from the world in the future, the world of humans. And then it has all these things like this part here, in this part of the story, what the redactors of the Torah were trying to do was they were trying to create a set of laws that governed like how people live their lives from day to day. Now the laws were very strange, to our modern sensibilities, and they were very esoteric too. They certainly didn't apply to every aspect of a trade or how people live their lives in the Levant, or in the Hasmonean kingdom. They only applied to some people, but it was still an attempt by these people to create a set of laws that they could use to govern their day-to-day life. And they connected this idea of a set of laws with this God that they've also created. So they've created these laws, they've created this God, and they've given the God a truly Homeric story. The God is like this entity which has done all of these things, that are these are the kinds of stories that trap people into religion in the first place, that trap people into theism, because it makes these extraordinary claims without any kind of evidence, and then it compels belief. And the way in which it compels belief is by locking you into a set of expectations, a set of cultural and community expectations that you have to observe constantly, and by obeying those rules, those cultural rules, you're supposed to express your affinity for the invisible deity. And by doing that, you feel a sense of belonging. I think a lot of it is about the human compulsion to somehow feel connected with the, with your own inner, your own inner authoritarian. I think that within every person there's the compulsion towards authoritarianism, and this idea that there's something within you that you have to be subservient to or submit to. It's probably just a relic of childhood and being raised, because obviously, when you're a child, you have to be raised by something that, because the human process of development takes so long. It takes so many years to develop a human being, because we have to teach human beings so many things. We're not just born with the genetic instincts to navigate these complex societies that we've created. I think that to a large extent we don't really understand why we've created these complex societies or what we hope to get out of them. I think they're just kind of an accidental byproduct of agriculture, and also something just specifically unique about our own human intelligence that creates the kind of environment in which we thrive, but we don't exactly know why we exist, or what the purpose of our existence is, or why we're surrounded by this complex society. These religions, they give some sense of clarity, they give the illusion of clarity, and they give the illusion of certainty, and so people really appreciate that, and they follow it. And I can understand how living in an existential universe where there's not a clear purpose to the universe, there's not a clear purpose to why we exist, it's really nice to feel like there is some kind of certainty, and as science has progressed in terms of explaining what the universe is to us, helping us understand that we live in this kind of cosmic void, how these just incredible distances that it is between us and even just the nearest planets, and learning that all of the planets are basically empty shells, and our planet happens to be full of life, but we don't know where any other life is in the universe, and we're our existence is extremely precarious. It depends on very just a few things. I mean, the earth has to be in the right place in relationship to the sun. The sun has to be working. Our environment has to be working correctly in order for us to exist. It's very precarious. And, we like earlier today I was listening to We Contain Multitudes, which is a book about bacteria and the evolution of life on Earth, and how we're so dependent on bacteria. And our body is made up of like 60 billion cells, and about half of those cells aren't even human; they're just mitochondrial. But I mean, that's the truth of what we are, and science has helped us understand it. But it doesn't necessarily comfort us. The atheism doesn't necessarily comfort your own existential anxiety at like your own precarious existence and what is the meaning of your existence. And religion, kind of offers that. A religion, even if it's a false claim, it's still comforting to have that false claim, because it gives you something that you can sort of latch on to. So I think that's a lot of the reason that people really are so fascinated with religion. I'm fascinated with religion and with science. I think that they're both equally fascinating. I mean, in the book I've been reading this week, We Contain Multitudes, I was introduced to the idea by Nick Lane, the biologist, that the idea that that all life on Earth basically evolved from one moment in time when a bacteria and an archaea somehow, almost impossibly, an archaea integrated a bacteria into itself, and this created what are they called, sorry I don't remember. It may be actually the archaea that was created by bacteria and another form of single-celled organism. Anyways, I think that's the point of the story, was that the archaea became the basis for complex life on Earth. And, for about 2.5 billion years on Earth, were mostly bacteria. And the bacteria completely transformed the Earth, but they didn't really have any complex life. And the way that life actually became complex was because these two dominant forms of single-celled organisms that existed on Earth for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years, at some point one of them merged with another one, and it created a third branch of life, which is what we all come from. Now, to me, that's beautiful, and that's an origin story. That's a Genesis story. I mean, that story that Nick Lane, the biologist, really just beautifully summarized in his book. I don't know if that's truly how we got complex life on Earth, but it certainly is a really good hypothesis, and it's been widely examined and discussed by scientists. And I've seen some pretty convincing arguments for the idea that this is how complex life on Earth evolved. Of course, then after that, it still took hundreds of millions of years to create really complex animals and that sort of thing. But that's the story, and it explains the world in a way that religion never can. I just don't know if the writers of the Torah ever understood anything about bacteria, for instance, or viruses. I mean, they knew something. They knew something was happening. They didn't know exactly what to call it, but they knew that something was happening in the world around them, and they made a set of rules for how to deal with that. that gave them a sense of control over their environment. And that in turn, having that sense of control, whether it was real or false, gives people a sense of security. And so, I think that is a lot like Mishpatim, these laws. This is the foundation of that sense of security. It's what religious nationalism gives people. And, at its best, when it's used with some discrimination and some wisdom, it can be used at least to try to reach a moral good. I'm not one of these people who says that just because it's coming from a religion that means it's bad. It doesn't mean at all that it's bad. It's just that it's a religious nationalist text, and so it has a certain kind of perspective to it. But it can definitely be used to point towards a moral good. But it can also be used in a really terrible way to be very negative, or to have deleterious consequences for some people, while also enriching other people in the name of the observation of the religion, which unfortunately is one of the reasons that so many of us become atheists, is because we see the hypocrisy in some religious communities at some times in history. Anyways, so let's go ahead and read some text, and I have to warn you right away, trigger warning, that it gets really bad right away. Like, as soon as we start reading, it basically gets absolutely horrible. And it's really hard to understand. I don't really understand exactly what the redactors of the text were thinking. I don't know why they decided that they were going to have this horrible text with all of these horrible rules right after having talked about these really exciting and really positive things that supposedly had just happened in the history of these people. Now they're going to give you these horrible laws that are just absolutely terrible. And we'll get into the psychology of some of them. I'm not going to be able to get through most of this because I think it would take me literally an entire week just to get through this text. And I only give myself an hour. Like, I do an hour of this and then I say, okay, that's enough. We're going to stop now. So, but like I said, I think it would literally take me like 168 hours to get through just this entire text, because it's just so difficult. It's really difficult to read. But let's get started. It's Exodus chapter 21, verse 1. God told Moses, "These are the laws that you must set before them." Okay, so God's talking to Moses. The redactors want to make sure that everyone understands this is the voice of God. This isn't like Moses' own head. And this is certainly, this isn't Moses thinking, and this isn't the redactors or the authors of the Torah making this up to benefit themselves. This is God, which is so to me, this is so offensive, because if there's a God, I can't see why the God would possibly make up some of these horrible, horrible rules. But let's read them. I think that as we read the rules, it'll become really clear, like, who these rules benefit, and maybe why the authors decided that they wanted them in the Torah. So here's rule number 1. If you buy a Hebrew bondman from the court, he must serve his master for 6 years, and in the 7th year he must go free without further obligation to make any payment. So that's basically like the very first law is a law about human servitude. It's a law that says that if somebody is in debt, if they can't pay their bills, then they can sell themselves and you can buy them. And if you buy them, then they have to serve you for 6 years. Now that's a really good deal. I don't know how much you get paid, but imagine, like, let's talk about, say, a typical wage in the United States. So, like, maybe a typical wage for, not making a lot of money, like maybe a little better than minimum wage, like, maybe a blue collar, a very low end blue collar job, or, a low end service industry job. Let's say you make $50,000 a year. So if you had to sell yourself into slavery, like this story is telling you to do, then you would make, whoever bought you would be getting the equivalent of $300,000 worth of free labor from you because of the fact that you sold yourself. So if you didn't sell yourself for at least $300,000, then the person who bought you is going to be getting a pretty good deal. Plus, I imagine that if they buy you, then you're probably going to work more than a typical 40-hour week. You're probably going to be working all the time. And so the value of what your labor is, if you actually got paid for it, is probably even more than that. It's probably significantly more than that. So this is a really good deal for whoever buys human beings. But what's so horrifying about it, what's so absolutely horrifying about it, is that it's in the Torah. It's in the Torah. I mean, it was just literally just a few chapters ago, just a few parshas ago, that everybody was complaining about being slaves. 600,000 people were complaining that they were slaves, and they didn't have any straw to make their bricks, and they were suffering, and they were in misery under Pharaoh and all the horrible things Pharaoh was doing. And now here they are, and what are they doing? They're talking about, here's how you buy slaves. Here's the condition for buying a slave. And not just any slave, a Hebrew slave, a Hebrew servant. It's not even talking about buying slaves from the Amorites or the Hittites or the Jebusites or whoever else. This is like buying one of your own people as a slave, which is just, this is terrible. It's just, this is horrible. Why is this in the Torah? Why is this here? It's just, what is this doing? And it's like, this is the kind of thing that makes people into atheists. It does, because it's such a terrible, terrible story. Anyways, but let's keep on going. Okay, so the next law, let's see here. Okay, the next law, if he comes to his service single, he must leave single. If he has a wife, she will leave his master's care with him. So, okay, well, that's, I mean, thanks for being a human being. Okay. Thanks so much, whoever wrote the Torah, for saying, oh, guess what? If you are married and you so apparently, if you sell yourself into slavery, then that means that your wife has to come along and she's a slave too. At least that's what this says to me. I mean, come on, why do you think there would be some God writing this rule? This is obviously a human being writing the rule, and they're writing a rule that's going to benefit people who buy slaves, who buy servants, who buy serfs. This is going to benefit a certain class of people. And that's just deeply uncomfortable to think that this is being used to try to tell some kind of truth about religion and about deeper truths about human beings. This isn't, to me, this part isn't, there's other parts of the text here that are nice. I think at the beginning of this Torah study, I talked about the one that said, you shall treat the stranger in your land, with respect and with dignity, because you were strangers once in the land. And that's a good one. There's some other good ones in here too. I'm kind of going verse by verse. I've only gotten 3 verses in, but like I said, there's about 100 of these. Okay, the next verse says, if he has a Jewish wife and his master gives him a non-Jewish bondswoman for a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the non-Jewish wife and her children will belong to her master, and when he leaves his master's service, he must leave them alone without them. That's horrible. That's utterly horrible. So this is the human breeding project. I mean, in this line, you're basically saying, that if, and of course, this is all still from the man's point of view. Even as a slave, it's still from the man's point of view. There's not the woman's point of view here. You don't even know. I mean, the text seems to be saying that the woman becomes the slave, right? I mean, isn't that what it's saying? At least that's what I'm reading. What I'm reading is it says, that the woman is a slave, basically, and that she is the property of. So she's, I guess what it's saying is that the woman who's a slave is either the property of the man who sold himself into slavery, or she's the property of the man that he sold himself into slavery to. But in none of these statements does it say, that the woman has her own agency. It's basically a verse about whether she's the slave of her the servant of her husband, or if she's the slave of the man who owns her husband for the time that he sold himself into servitude. And that's what this rule is. I mean, I don't possibly see any kind of a benefit. I mean, if you're going to create a set of laws for a society, why not start with really good ones? Start with the really big laws, like everybody is equal. People have a right to to health care. They have a right to housing. People have a fundamental right to nutrition. You can't. How about you can't snatch a child out of a school and stick them in an ICE concentration camp? Homeless people don't deserve to live on tents freezing, on the side of the road. Everybody deserves a right to health care. I mean, how about some of those rules? Why didn't this God, if this God is so concerned about these people, why is the first thing that this God is doing, or why is the first thing that Moses is doing in the story is making new slaves? I mean, why are they doing slaves again? So, sometimes I hear stories about, how people try to justify this kind of thing in the Torah. And, one of the things I've heard people say is, well, the problem here is that you have these people who in the story were slaves. And so the first thing that they're going to reproduce is slavery, because that's what they knew. For 400 years, their lives were slavery. And so now the first thing that they're going to do in the text is they're going to try to preserve the memory of slavery. And, they're very concerned about what do you do if you're a slave, because that's what they were. So they're not necessarily free. But I think that's kind of ingenuous. I mean, I don't really agree with that interpretation of the text. I mean, I think the text is really clearly here's the space where it's a good to be an atheist. I mean, it really is good to be an atheist here when you're looking at this part of the text, because the text is really clearly trying to benefit a certain class of people, and it's done all of this work to get you to believe in this mythology that's been created and to have this fear of this God. And now the first thing that the God is telling you to do are things that serve very specific human interests of only a very specific group of people. And so that's just super problematic. Now, over the hundreds of years since this text have been written, people have been able to take them and kind of hollow out the meaning of them and try to get at something deeper in it that they can find that's maybe positive. I'm not really familiar with all of the history of that. There's a lot of that in the Talmud where people will look at a source text, one of these verses, and then they'll use it. They'll take the core principle in the text, get rid of all of the language. So we're obviously not going to in the modern age, we're not going to buy and sell people, although, as we can see by the Epstein files, that actually does happen still to human beings. But we're going to take some deeper principle. We're going to take, some really terrible rule in the Torah like this and reshape it and, rework it into something that's much more positive, or use it as the foundation for something that's much more positive. And, as an atheist, I think that's part of what, kind of excites me about doing this work is that, as an atheist, when I look at these texts, I'm able to look at them and kind of, ask questions about why does this exist, and what's really going on here. And it gives me a certain kind of freedom for how to look at them that I think you can't really see if you're just looking at them through the eyes of religion and through the eyes of your culture. It's you have to go through a lot of mental gymnastics in order to make these texts have meaning. And part of me, the part of me that really appreciates science and appreciates looking at things scientifically, like that part of me wants to look at this text and try to understand, what was really going on here with the authors. Like, why were they writing this down in the 3rd century or the 2nd century? What was so urgent to them? Was there a movement at the time, like some sort of a liberation movement, like where people were really trying to abandon slavery, for instance? Was that maybe one of the things that was happening? Were people saying, oh, we're going to, get rid of slavery? And then, I don't know. Who knows what was going on here? Slavery was prevalent in the ancient world, although it wasn't really dominant. As I've talked about in previous Torah studies, slavery constituted 5 to 10% of any particular culture, but it wasn't necessarily the dominant form of social organization. So, why this obsession right away with slavery? Anyways, let's read a couple more here. So we read this one about the wife. So the next one says, if in such a case the bondsman says, that the bondsman is like the servant, says, I am fond of my master, my non-Jewish wife, and my non-Jewish children. I do not want to go free. So here's this part gets kind of bloody and gross. So his master must bring him to court, and they must take him to the door, which must be standing upright, the doorpost. His master must then pierce his right earlobe with an awl, and the master must serve him until the Jubilee year. So, so basically what it's saying is that if this person develops feelings, which obviously he's going to do, he's going to develop feelings for his wife and for his children. And if he develops feelings for his wife and his children, then if he wants to keep his wife and his children, then he has to go to a doorpost, and he has to have somebody like run something through his earlobe into a doorpost, something called an awl, and then he's a permanent servant of his owner. This is all just so horrible. It gets even worse here in just a minute, though. This is just, this is part of why people become atheists. It's because why is this in the Torah? Why did these people write this? There's some things that are just so heartbreaking to read, and it's hard to read stuff like this and think, oh, this is in a sacred text, and people are reading this and they're saying that this is the word of God. It's just, how can obviously this isn't serving the interest of a God. This is serving the interest. So the people who wrote this, my guess is that the people who wrote this probably owned slaves, and they wanted to continue to own their slaves. They wanted to own their slaves who were their fellow Jews, who were, and they get a better deal out of owning them and having them be in permanent bondage to them than they do out of paying them wages. Now, later on, there will be some sections about wages. And so, not, like I said, not everybody was a slave. Some people were laborers. But if you can take advantage of somebody's situation and get them into, debt for you, then this is a really good deal for you. And this is not good. This is not a good, God is not showing their best face in this text. The God is envisioned by these writers. This is not their best face, but okay, so let's read some more here. Okay, yeah, like I said, it gets bad, and for some reason they just put, there's a lot of really horrible rules in this part of the Torah, and some are even more horrible than others. So here's a really bad one. Okay, if a man sells his daughter as a bondswoman, she may not leave his service as non-Jewish bond servants do. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if a man sells his daughter as a bondswoman, she may not leave the service of the bondsperson as non-Jewish bondservants do. So, it just look at the very first sentence. If a man sells his daughter, why did they think they could sell their daughter? What God ever gave you the idea that your daughter was an asset, that you could somehow benefit from selling her? It's just, the language of patriarchy here is just so blank. It's not even pretending to be anything other than the fundamental language of patriarchy. It's really better here to go with Torah if you're going to even read this part of the Parsha, because then at least something is being reversed. There's at least some part of this story that's being reversed, so that it's at least maybe saying something a little bit more interesting. But even that's not good. Nobody gets to sell their daughter. The language should be, the divine says, no human being shall ever be sold for the benefit of another human being. That's what the text should say. But, again, this is an example of why it's really clear that the text was written to benefit a certain group of people. This is people who own slaves, people who own servants. And if you don't, this is also for parents. Can you imagine growing up in a society where your parents could sell you? And it's like, so then, talk about, this is just, think about it, what this is saying. This is basically saying that you can sell your children, which I suppose some people did. But isn't that just horrifying? Even 2,300 years ago, isn't that just as horrifying 2,300 years ago as it is now? And imagine how it feels this just creates so many problems. It's unbelievable, the problems that this creates. And it's like, you just have to, I just keep on asking myself over and over again, what kind of a God would allow parents to sell their children into slavery or into bondage? It's just, why is this here? Okay, the next one is, these are all just so awful. The first 10 or 12 of these, and unfortunately we started with verse 1, and we haven't gotten very far in the text because these are all just so terrible. Okay, the next one says, if she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who should have designated her as a wife for himself, he must assist in her redemption. He is not authorized to sell her to another master, for he betrayed her by not marrying her. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's kind of good, except what about her? I mean, what if he is displeasing to her and she doesn't like him one bit? I mean, why is this even in here? I just don't even want to comment on that one. I just don't understand why that's in here. So let's go on to the next verse. The master designates her as a wife for his son. The son must accord her the standard rights of girls who marry. So this one's a little bit softer, but it's still, I mean, there's still, everything here is about coercion. It's like the woman is still considered to be property. There's nothing in here about consent. There isn't any woman who's consenting. Also, what if a woman wants to marry another woman? Or what if she doesn't want to marry anyone at all? In addition, what if a child doesn't want to be a bondservant to some creepy old man who thinks it's okay to buy women? I mean, what about all of those things too? It's just, yeah, and so this is supposed to be good. This is supposed to be good. There's something here about like, oh, if she, does something with her, if he does something with his son, then here's the rule for what you're supposed to do about that. And it's really not much better. Sorry, but it's just not much better. Anyways, okay, let's go on to the next verse. If he marries an additional wife, he may not reduce the first one's food, clothing, or conjugal rights. So it's like, okay, so that's basically saying, what does that say? That says, if he marries an additional wife, he may not reduce the first one's food, clothing, or conjugal rights. Okay, so I guess that's obvious. I mean, if you're going to have a bunch of wives, then they should all get equal treatment. I guess that's a good rule. I mean, I would assume you would want your wife to have a decent quality of life, but still, it's so. I don't know how many people at this time had lots of. I mean, how could you afford to have lots of wives? This whole thing is kind of foreign to me because I don't know anyone who has lots of wives. Oops, what happened? Sorry. I don't know why my phone just did that. Anyways, we've only got about 5 minutes left, so we'll just do a couple more here. Okay, there's some more here. If the master takes none of these 3 courses of action for her, she must go out free at the end of her term without owing him any additional payment. So again, I guess that's supposed to be good, but it's just hard to see how any of these particular verses. I just don't know if I really want to use this as my basis for trying to understand like positive human relationships. I'm just going to look at this and I'm going to say, okay, people were really brutal in the past. I mean, this isn't any more or less brutal than like so many stories from the ancient world and even from like the Middle Ages and even from really recent times. I mean, this is just kind of proof that human beings are really brutal and inconsiderate of each other. And like these are a set of rules about how to create more brutality, how to create more misogyny, how to benefit one class over another class, how to discount the humanity in another person. And so, I feel like that this is really a teaching moment. if I really care about this tradition, which I really do, I really like Jewish tradition a lot, then what I have to do is I have to look at this. And first of all, I have to say, obviously, there wasn't any God that wrote this. This was written by people. And like, for me, what's beneficial about this is this tells me like what not to do. This basically gives me a blueprint for how not to treat human beings. I mean, I already instinctively know not to do this to human beings, but if I'm ever in a point in my life where I feel like I have a right to have some kind of power over another person or some kind of authority, I can go back and read these texts, and I can be so disturbed by what I'm reading that I can be reminded that these texts are here to teach me like how to not be this way. And maybe that's the point of the texts. Maybe the point of the texts like is that you have these people who started out in slavery, and so the text is sort of trying to tell you that the very first thing that's important to them is like what they're supposed to do now that they're out of slavery. And the very first thing that they're thinking of is they're thinking of, oh, how can we be slaves? You know, how can we continue to be or how can we benefit from slavery? And maybe they're just so traumatized by what they've been through as human beings that they want to pass on this trauma to other people. And so that's the very first thing that they're writing down. And they think that this is some sort of a God telling them that, but this isn't obviously any God. This is their trauma speaking back to them. And so, you know, I mean, I have the benefit of never having had to go through any of these situations, but, you know, I have the hindsight of being able to say, well, these are a bunch of really terrible ideas, and this obviously isn't something that you're going to want to do to your wife or your children. You certainly don't want to have another person in bondage. You know, let's peace, love, and understanding. You know, let's all love each other and treat each other with respect, and let's try to get along. Obviously, though, when you look at human existence, even how people treat each other now, you can see that people don't really do that. You know, you can see how there's so many examples of where people are cruel to each other and unkind. And so, if anything, you know, the takeaway from this very beginning of the Parsha is that, you know, the real value is in human kindness. And these are examples of what not to do. And what you want to do is the opposite of this. You want to be kind to your neighbors. You don't want to hold people in bondage. You want to treat people with respect. So anyways, thanks so much for sitting through this episode of Atheist Torah Study. This was Parsha Mishpatim. And my name's Emma. Again, thank you very much. This was week 18 of a 52-week cycle of the Torah. So we'll be back next week with some more Torah